Chapter 26, Trials Round 1. While the rumors at Hogwarts continued to get worse and worse, Headmistress Minerva McGonagall was already starting to introduce changes to the school. After a thorough review of the budget, which was quite large to begin with, and because of Dumbledore's tendency to reduce the number of teachers and subjects over time was even larger, she began looking for new staff members. The first hire was Felix Cresswell, great-uncle of Dirk Cresswell, an elderly healer, to assist Poppy in the hospital wing. Together those two could and should be able to restart the healing classes within 1 or 2 years of preparation. Felix was also a certified mind healer, so for the first time Hogwarts had something like a psychologist for students and staff, helping with both special and everyday issues. She also looked into alchemy professors, something very different from potions, like Severus tended to point out, and a new transfiguration teacher, though since she had 2 deputies and wasn't chief witch and supreme mugwump she should, and would be able to manage that for the time being. Everything after the owls she'd keep teaching either way, only Dumbledore could rival her in advanced transfiguration. And now, with upcoming changes, she could finally teach the students more. A replacement for Binns wasn't too easy to find besides. She'd need to exorcise him first either way. And then there's the problem with a suitable Muggle studies professor, one who actually knew something, and maybe she'd need a new old class for wizarding traditions and etiquette so the purebloods would have less reason to loathe Muggle-borns. Being the headmistress wasn't an easy job. Remus was handling his new job very well. The head of Gryffindor had already begun making changes in the house. For one, he worked more often in the common room to simply be present and among his students, but he also explicitly stated that they could come to his office any time. He even started to have one-on-one conversations with every lion so they got to know each other. Minnie hadn't been able to do all of that while handling most of Albus' duties too at the same time. Severus was still in the hospital wing, rarely awake and rather comatose. Cutting off his arm with Sectum Sempra out of all curses had been rough, but even rougher was the now severed connection with Riddle that had taken its toll to disappear completely. He'd still need a few more days, probably, even with all the potions. For the time being, Aurora Sinistra was acting head of Slytherin House, and she was taking almost the same approach as Remus, being there for her students and listening. She was glad that Minerva had taken over. She was much more focused on the job than Albus had ever been. And if the allegations were true, then, on the morning of the trials, Harry and Hermione were having breakfast before they'd had to leave. Both were already wearing formal robes, Harry black and red ones, Hermione a dark blue one. That did lead to whispers from the very moment they entered the great hall. Being out of school robes was no light offense. Ronald Weasley was the first one to speak up and confront the duo. "Oi, Potter, who do you think you are, being out of school robes, just like your damn friend there? Professor Kettleburn, Potter and Granger are not wearing school robes." The elderly professor, who was known for missing several limbs, and was, if one could still believe the previous timeline, due to retire after this year, walked up to the Gryffindor table and looked at Harry and Hermione. "You too, Lord Potter, Miss Granger." Despite the lack of friendliness and manners from Mr. Weasley here, his question isn't unfounded. "First of all, Weasley, you have detention with me this evening. I need someone to clean out the Niffler's barn. And please, refrain from insulting Miss Granger. Now you two have a valid reason." Hermione nodded. "Yes, Professor. We're due to depart to the Ministry for the first round of trials after breakfast, Harry as a Lord of the Gamut and me as a witness." "That should give us legitimate reason, shouldn't it?" The professor smiled. He would have hated to give those two detention. They were something special, and he kind of admired them. "If that is the case, Miss Granger, then that should suffice. Have a nice day then, and don't forget to change back when you return." As he turned around, Percy Weasley got up. "Actually, Professor, the student handbook, though not well known amongst the students thanks to the former headmaster, states that any lord or heir is allowed to wear formal robes with his house crests on them if it has the crest of his Hogwarts house on it, and he wears the matching tie. So that means once Lord Potter here removes the glamour charm on his house crests, his noble effort to not brag like Mr. Malfoy, then his attire is absolutely appropriate. I'm not sure if Miss Granger is under the protection of any of your houses, Lord Potter, because then this rule would apply to her too. Then he addressed the whole hall. "If anyone wants to have a copy of the student handbook, then just ask me. I'm also able to inform you about your rights, too." Then he sat down, while Harry smiled at him. Percy, even if he was most likely just trying to make his future prospects better, had openly broken with Dummels and supported Harry and his friends, even if it was against his brothers. Oh, if he continued like that, then Harry was sure that Amy would offer him a spot in the DMLE to train him to be a prosecutor for the ministry. And if not, well then Harry would get the man a job. He would be a great solicitor at some point, no matter how big-headed he could be. His mention of house protection brought up an old discussion between Harry and Hermione. They hadn't done it because they wanted to keep everything secret, especially when it came to Harry's titles. So if they didn't want to reveal his status as Lord Potter, then there was no point in her being under his protection, because he'd have to make that public to act on that. And at some point, though life was way too stressful currently, they'd start dating and become a soulmate couple, which in the eyes of the law was equal to a betrothal. Then she'd be under his protection too. But now house protection would be an idea. Without a lot of thinking, they did the vows to that on their way to the headmistress's office. "I, Lord Harry James Potter, head of the noble and most ancient house of Potter, offer you, Hermione Jean Granger, the protection of my house. I offer to fight you duels, to protect you and to represent you if you abide by my word as your lord. Do you take this offer?" "I, Hermione Jean Granger, take the offer from the Lord of Potter. I shall abide by his word, and he will fight my duels, protect me, and represent me. So mote it be. So mote it be." And now, after a bright flash of light, the Potter crest appeared on her robe, surrounded by a fine silver line. It was the sign of house protection. Minnie eyed the crest for a second, but then just continued to activate the flu for them. She would join them, at least for some trials. After all, she had assembled quite a lot of the evidence too. At the ministry, Sirius, wearing the purple robes with the black crest, was pacing. He was standing in Amy's office, waiting for Harry and his friend Hermione to come through the flue. Amelia was sitting at her desk and smiling. To her, the whole situation was utterly hilarious. Then it knocked on the door, which made Sirius jump up in surprise. Amelia, knowing who that was, just grinned and opened the door for Moony. Sirius couldn't believe it. Amy was one hell of a cheeky woman, and Remus, whom he was hugging in a Hermione Granger kind of way, not that he knew that, he still hadn't met Hermione, was grinning. He was looking good, much better than during their time at school. Healthy, well-dressed, and happy. None of those things were something a werewolf usually was. Sirius started crying out of happiness while Remus was patting his back. Then the flue activated, and Harry, Hermione, and Minnie stepped out of the green flames, which made Sirius' day even better. He let go of Moony and hugged Harry, still crying. Amy, Hermione, and Minnie watched the emotional reunion, and none of those could hold back tears either. After all the introductions had been made and Sirius had calmed down, they went over their plans for the day. First item on the agenda was for Harry to claim his titles and to free Sirius properly. For that, they'd need a new chief warlock, or to be precise at first, an interim one. From then on, they'd put the minister and then the arrested lords into Azkaban, hopefully, followed by the other corrupt officials. More than that would probably be impossible to achieve. All the lords and other seat holders, proxies, department heads, holders of the Order of Merlin, first class, were sitting in their seats when the murmurs started. A handful of the dark-sided lords were not present, but their proxies. Crouch wasn't here, neither was Umbridge, Dumbledore, or Amelia Bones. The latter then entered the grand chamber and gracefully walked up to the spot where Chief Warlock, Minister, and Senior Department Head usually resided. One must imagine the grand chamber as a big semicircular room, and on the wall opposite of the entrance there were the high seats, reserved for said three people. In the row underneath them there were the seats for the scribes and assistants. Facing this spot were all the normal seats, distributed onto several floors. The top floor was reserved for the noble and most ancient houses, the one beneath that for all the other noble and ancient houses, then the nobles, and at last the department heads and the Order of Merlin holders. On the ground floor there were spots for the press and the visitors, as well as any additional people needed during a session, auras, witnesses in prosecutions, etc. When Amy walked up to the high seats, the room started to get louder and louder, Many members of the press already started scribbling things down and making photographs. Order! Seal the doors! Those dark-sided lords who had not been arrested started protesting, but Amy had been smart. She had the right auras placed in the chamber for security, those that knew the truth. They sealed the doors for her, and now everyone was waiting for Amelia to explain. Lord Bulstrode was the first to demand that. Lady Bones, I ask for the chamber to be unsealed right now. We need at least the chief warlock and the minister present. Narcissa Malfoy, the proxy for her husband, seconded that, but Amelia rejected it. On grounds of ministry law, I reject that proposal. I invoke Article 15 of the founding charter of the Wisengamot. Now, the light-sided Lord Ogden spoke up. Appointment of an interim chief warlock for the duration of one session. You can't invoke that, Lady Bones. You're not the Minister of Magic. Oh no, esteemed Lord Ogden, that's where you're wrong. In a top-secret mission, the DMLE has arrested both Fudge and Dumbledore, as well as several lords of this chamber. We are here today to prosecute them, but for that I need a chief warlock. And before someone asks, by law I am appointed interim minister following the arrest of the chief warlock, the Minister of Magic, and the head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, the only ministry head with higher seniority than mine. And so I repeat myself. As acting Minister of Magic, I invoke Article 15 of the founding charter of the Wisengamot. Augusta Longbottom, one of their supporters, stood up and did as they had planned. I nominate Lord Arthur Greengrass as interim chief warlock. Lord Bulstrode immediately got up and nominated Lucius Malfoy, but that proposal was rejected since this article clearly stated that the nominated member had to be present. I second Lady Longbottom's nomination. Everyone turned around and looked at who had spoken. A man, fresh out of St. Mungo's, for the first time dressed in a proper formal robe, and with a fierce look. Usually, Dumbledore's quiet muggle supporter. A man without an own voice. Arthur Weasley. Augusta Longbottom had brought him up to speed after hearing about the potions and his release, thinking that if Arthur was anything like the previous Weasley lords, then they needed him. The nominee from the dark side was in the end Lord Bulstrode, while the light side tried nominating Lord Macmillan, an even more devoted Dumbledore follower than Arthur Weasley. But no one dared seconding that, as Lady Bones, Lady Marchbanks and Lord Ogden too seemed to want Arthur Greengrass, a proud but honest and neutral lord. Just as Lady Bones wanted to call for a vote, Lord Abbot, not Hannah's father, but very stubborn uncle, another one of Dummel's men, and unfortunately quite familiar with the law, wanted to invoke subsection 13 of the article, seconded by Macmillan. It stated that if not by death, sickness, or any other health reason, absence from the British Isles, and by that unable to appear on time, or an incarceration following a guilty verdict by the Wisengamot, unable to attend the session, the Lords can request the presence of the chief warlock. That meant Amy had no choice but to bring prisoner Dumbledore into the chamber. Once he was in the visitors' stands, Dumbledore started speaking despite not having the right to speak, just what Amy had feared. Hello, Amelia. I see you want to appoint an interim chief warlock. Well, I know the protocol and I can't stop you, but you all, my friends and supporters, know that I will be found innocent and that I will assume my position once again. My friends, it is not the time to argue and fight now, but I call for a silencing charm to hinder Headmaster Dumbledore from speaking. Once Arthur Weasley said that, everyone, including the old meddler himself, was stunned. Weasley defying Dumbledore and supporting Greengrass together with Longbottom. Something was going on here. Luckily, Lord Ogden seconded the call, and after a brief vote, Amelia announced the result. By an overwhelming majority, former Headmaster Dumbledore will be put under a silencing charm to no longer interfere with the session. Aura Moody, please. The Gamot wasn't in agreement about what had been more surprising. That Dumbledore apparently lost his position at Hogwarts, that Weasley defied him, or that Moody seemed to be very happy about silencing Dumbledore. As if nothing had happened, Lady Bones then called for the vote on the chief warlock, and Lord Greengrass won easily. After taking the vow in the center of the room, he joined Amelia on the high seats and took over the session. Dear members of the Wisengamot, I thank you for my election, and I promise to do the job as good as I can. Now, usually I'm all in when it comes to big speeches. Everyone laughed. They had some experience with Arthur's long speeches. But we have a lot on our agenda. Firstly, I call for Lord Harry James Potter to claim his seats on the Wisengamot. Lord Potter, if you could please come down here. Harry, hiding underneath the cloak with Sirius, appeared out of thin air and did as Lord Greengrass asked of him. Before we continue, does anyone have any objections? That was a standard question, but no one objected to those. Family magic was always right, and if one would try claiming something that wasn't his or hers, they'd pay with their magic or their life. They all saw the rings, so even if they would want to object, there was no legal ground. Unless your name was Albus Dumbledore. Amelia sighed. Remove the silencing spell for the time being. Now the old meddler started to play the old friendly grandfather. Oh, Harry, you're way too young to claim those titles. That's not what your parents would have wanted, and you're not experienced enough for all that power. Harry just laughed. He would hit back at Dumbledore, every single one of his points. It is my parents will that I do that. Besides, I have fought Voldemort. Don't you think I can manage the power? I am your legal guardian, Harry. I order you to stop that right now. You're a liar, Dumbledore. First of all, I'm emancipated just as it's stated in my father's will. Those have been sealed by the chief warlock. That's a crime, Harry. Stop calling me Harry. You illegally sealed them. You illegally appointed yourself my guardian and put me into the care of my aunt and uncle, which is expressly forbidden in the wills, to which you are a witness to. There had been enough other people aside from Sirius and the Longbottoms as my potential guardians, namely Amelia Bones, Andromeda Tonks, or Minerva McGonagall. Besides, I opened the wills at Gringotts, so no crime, old meddler. Silence. Absolute silence. Albus was furious, but hid it. The damn goblins should have informed him. Hagrid should have held him back. It was all Minerva's fault. She must have become his guardian and emancipated him. There was no way anyone would go against family magic. Harry's claim was clear. He had lost, and he knew it. The chief warlock spoke up. Lord Potter has provided us with a goblin-certified copy of the wills, since ours are still sealed. This backs Lord Potter's claims. He was allowed to open the wills and emancipate himself, with Minerva McGonagall as witness and as guardian, legitimizing everything. The genealogy for the other titles has been provided too. You'll see copies of the files on your tables. Any further comments or objections? Yes, I do have an objection, Chief Warlock. Lady Malfoy, I am very familiar with goblin law and magical genealogy. All those claims are legitimate, as much as it pains me to admit it. All but one. The heir black title belongs to my son. I reject that objection. Lord Potter obviously won't claim the seat of Lord of Black. This objection has no place here, but it will be resolved soon. It actually is the next item on our agenda. Then I apologize, my lord. You are indeed correct. This has no place here. Then, since there were no further objections, especially after Lord Potter had yelled at Dumbledore, called him an old meddler, and implicated him in several crimes, Harry took his oath as a member of the Wisengamot. Which seats do you claim, my lord? I claim the seat of Potter as the heir of my father. I claim the seat of Gryffindor as the heir of the Potters. I claim the seat of Peveril as the descendant of Ignatus Peveril. I claim the seat of Slytherin as the descendant of Ignatus Peveril. And I claim the seat of Ravenclaw as the heir of my mother and her family. So mote it be. So mote it be. Harry then proceeded to walk up to his Potter seat, Amelia and Arthur smiling at him, just like Augusta when he walked past her. Now things would get interesting. Amy nodded at Kingsley, a sign for him to get a certain prisoner from the holding cells. Then the chief warlock announced the next item on the agenda. I call for the trial of Lord Sirius Orion Black, head of the noble and most ancient house of Black, requested by the DMLE. Please come down to us, Lord Black. When Sirius appeared out of nowhere next to Harry, several members of the Wisengamot started to scream and panic. A few even tried cursing him, but the auras intervened. Amy got up. Dear lords and ladies, you all might be shocked by this, but and as always, copies of the evidence on your tables. Lord Black never had a trial. He was never properly interrogated, but just tossed into Azkaban by Bagnold, Crouch, and Dumbledore on the hearsay that he was the secret keeper of the Potters. Let's make the whole thing quick and simple. In the Potter wills you can clearly see a magically crossed-out paragraph with the inheritance for one Peter Pettigrew, naming him as the secret keeper. This, and all of you should know that, is irrefutable proof that Pettigrew betrayed the Potters and was the secret keeper. Otherwise, magic wouldn't have forfeited his inheritance. I call for a vote on the betrayal of the Potters. Who deems Lord Black innocent? Who guilty? Lord Black, you're cleared of betraying the Potters to Thomas Marvolo Riddle, aka Lord Voldemort. The Daily Prophet had already mentioned something like that, the Dark Lord being a half-blood, but with the head of the DMLE officially stating that, the info became more than just a rumor. Beside it, they just cleared Sirius Black, at least from one charge. The chamber was loud, everyone was furious, and started doubting everything about Dumbledore and Crouch, when Lady Malfoy got up again. That clears him of one thing, but he's still guilty of killing Pettigrew and the Muggles. Not that she minded the murder of Muggles, but she wanted him in prison so Draco would become Lord Black. Oh, that we can resolve easily too. I call for a witness to be brought forward. The DMLE presents Peter Pettigrew. After the whole Wisengamot had calmed down again, Lady Bones asked for a vote on the usage of Veritaserum, which then made the rest pretty simple. They didn't even need any of the other potential witnesses, Remus, Mione, Harry, etc., who she would have needed without the permission for Veritaserum. Sirius got cleared of all charges and Pettigrew's statements were recorded to be used at his trial. But in the end, Amelia had one last question. Mr. Pettigrew, if I might ask, who did cast the Fidelius charm for the Potters, this person must have known about Lord Black's innocence. She knew what the answer would be, but she wanted it for the record, and she wanted to shock everyone. It was Albus Dumbledore. At the end, everyone, except from those stubborn Dumbledore supporters that always fell for the greater good, as an explanation, was quite shocked of how much could go wrong. Sirius was now sitting on his seat, having been awarded compensation money, though some was taken as a fine for the illegal animagus thing, and was cleared of all charges. Then, in accordance with Arcturus, well, not that that mattered, but Sissy would accept that, he named Harry his heir. Then the real trial started, beginning with Fudge who, as he had promised, confessed, since the evidence was more than clear. Since he gave up a few lords, all already in custody, and some more ministry workers who had taken bribes, the DMLE pleaded for a year in prison, though in the wing without dementors, quite the hefty fine, and a ban on working in any political position. Fudge even agreed to that, hoping that afterwards he could take the rest of his money and just leave wizarding Britain forever. After the now former minister, all the arrested lords were tried, and without any exception sentenced to between 10 and 50 years in Azkaban, as well as some hefty fines. Thanks to Fudge and the Goblins, they were able to prove the corruption easily and beyond all doubt. With that in mind, Amy called for the use of Veritaserum, which did cause some agitation in the Wisengamot. Usually the truth serum wasn't used on purebloods, but Amelia insisted that since they were already declared guilty, they could do it to learn about any additional crimes. With the broad support of the light and neutral lords, especially with the House of Black and Harry's many votes, they voted in favor of the usage of Veritaserum, leading to the discovery of many counts of murder and torture, as well as being part of a terrorist group, proving the Imperious defense was nonsense once and for all. At the end of the second trial, Lord Nott, after Crabbe's trial, most of the Dark Proxies had given up too. They had gotten several additional names for Death Eaters and corrupt officials, and Amy had already given out the arrest orders. The expansion of the Wisengamot, with Harry claiming 5 seats, Sirius changing the affiliation of the Black seat from dark to neutral, and their light and neutral allies made sure that everyone got what they deserved. Sure, some tried to argue that the goblins could have forged the evidence, but honestly, not even the dark-sided lords wanted to anger them. The argument like, oh, no one ever enforced the anti-corruption laws, or killing a muggle or muggle-born isn't that bad, didn't work with Amelia as minister. No matter how often they had been ignored previously, she'd enforce those laws. After all the Death Eaters, meaning the Lords and Walden Macnair, Amelia decided that they'd try to finish the Crouch and the Hopkirk trial. The latter was an easy one, just corruption in this case. She even confessed, so she'd get away with a fine, and being fired with a lifelong ban of working at the ministry. Lord Bartemius Crouch Sr. was a completely different case. Aside from the obvious charge, which hadn't been made public yet, Lady Marchbanks wanted to sue him for the misconduct in Lord Black's case. Sirius, though, remembering how chaotic the war had been, said he wouldn't want to charge Crouch for that. Dumbledore had been pretty convincing. Maybe he had even used a compulsion charm. He likes those. You'll see in old Dummel's trial, leading to shock and disbelief, as well as amusement for the defacing of Dumbledore's name. Then, before they started reading the charges, Barty asked to speak. He had been waiting for this day to come, knowing how it would end. Fighting the unavoidable was pointless. Members of the Wisengamot, lords and ladies, Minister Bones, Chief Warlock Greengrass. I have to admit that I've been waiting for this day since I freed my son from Azkaban. Augusta was looking furious. She hadn't known this until now. Barty Crouch Jr. was one of those guilty of torturing her son and daughter-in-law, making that a personal matter. Senior would never get out of Azkaban alive, she'd ensure that. She raised her voice. Barty, how could you do that? You know what he had done. You all think about Frank and Alice when you vote. I know, Augusta. He's still my son. My beloved wife got sick, you all know it. She wanted to see him one last time. I arranged that, but what I didn't know is that she, the sneaky Slytherin she had been all her life, had prepared Polyjuice so they could switch places. And since Dementors can't see, only feel, and I circumvented the guards, a healthy and a weak person entered, a healthy and a weak person left. She took the potion until her death 4 days later. It might comfort you to know that he never left the house. I kept him under the Imperius locked away. Griselda Marchbanks, probably the oldest member of the Wisengamot, jumped up. You bloody fool, Bartemius, and after your death, then the maniac that your son indisputably is would have been free. Barty, by now pretty upset, all but yelled back. I never wanted that. I only found out about the plan once we were at Azkaban. She was dying. I just couldn't say no to her. All I've been doing since then is trying to manage that disaster that her last wish brought me. To a degree, I'm even glad I got caught. You know how awfully exhausting that is. Just toss me into Azkaban for prison break and repeated and unsanctioned usage of an unforgivable. I'm just tired of all that. As expected, the verdict was pretty clear. A lifelong sentence in Azkaban. At the end of the day, because by now it was nearly 8 in the evening, the chief warlock adjourned the session. I hereby adjourn this session of the Wisengamot. We will continue tomorrow at 10. Since we haven't discussed every item on the agenda, it will not be a new session. We'll resume this one, meaning that the title of Chief Warlock will stay with me until we have finished all trials. Still missing are the trials for Mr. Peter Pettigrew, Mrs. Rita Skeeter, Mr. Albus Dumbledore, Mr. Rubeus Hagrid, and Mrs. Marley Weasley. The nature of the charges remains confidential. Any questions? No. Then unseal the doors. At the end of the session, most lords, except dark ones, came up to Harry and Sirius, offering their friendship, alliances, and betrothal contracts, which neither of them wanted. Sirius was hoping he'd have a chance with Amy, and Harry was undoubtedly in love with Hermione, which is obvious with soulmates. Once they had dealt with Riddle, they could maybe try going out. Up until now it had been too stressful. Only thing the two of them accepted right now were invitations for tea or dinner to discuss said things. But it seemed like all except the very dark ones and the Dumbledore fanatics wanted to work with them. They must have made one hell of a good expression. Once they were on their way to Amy's flu, already hoping that that was it with being annoyed, Barnabas Cuff walked up to them. Sure, Sirius had guaranteed him an interview through Amy, but right now they were both exhausted. Lord Black, Lord Potter. May I ask for an interview with the two of you? The public would surely want to know what motivates you to go against Dumbledore and the Minister. Sadly for him, Sirius was still not entirely recovered from Azkaban, and the session had exhausted him thoroughly. Barnabas, I know that Lady Bones guaranteed you an interview with me, but you've got to understand that I'm not fully recovered yet. If the Prophet wants a comment, then let's just say we can't stand all the injustice and corruption anymore. Thanks to the Goblin King and the investigation by Lady Bones and Lady McGonagall, we were able to put several corrupt officials and Death Eaters in prison. The law still needs to be harsher. Crimes on Muggleborn and half-bloods get punished less than on purebloods. That can't be happening anymore when they make up over half of our society. And Albus Dumbledore is an old meddling mastermind with no conscience. I dare say he caused more pain than Voldemort while trying to be an untouchable and almighty person. Everything else you'll find out at his trial. And if you want us as your friends, you better print the truth and no slander. I know for a fact that Amelia handed you a file on old Valdi's true identity. You know what to do with it. With that, he just walked away, wanting to go home as soon as possible and just sleep. Barnaba's cuff would usually never give up this fast, but this time was different. Lord Black was clearly still not back to strength, and besides, the man had given him enough material to cite him. Should he really start writing about you-know-who, though? Things were about to change, and if he did as Lord Black asked from him, then he could only benefit from it. Yes, he would write something. Something that Black and Potter would surely appreciate. Something that had the potential to cause turmoil and massive changes within the Wizarding Society.